when you say we pay for it, that's not technically true. The idea that everybody who's paying into Medicaid paid for it and now they get out what they paid in is obviously not true. It is a redistributive program, and to pretend otherwise is just silly. The people who are paying the payroll taxes are not the people who are taking out through Medicaid, obviously.
Can I just address that super quick? So if we're talking about Medicare, right? Not Medicaid.
Right.
So in Medicare, so you're both correct and incorrect. So it's not like I put in $20 and I get $20 back. That part is true.
Right.
But we all pay into Medicare together, and then we all get it when we are sick.
In today's video, Cenk Uygur absolutely destroys Ben Shapiro in a heated debate on healthcare. Ben Shapiro, as usual, tried to push his classic free market solves everything nonsense, arguing that universal healthcare is some big government boogeyman that'll destroy freedom and bankrupt the country. But Cenk Uygur was not having it. He came through with real-world stats showing how every other developed country guarantees healthcare, spends less, and has better outcomes. So let's dive in and watch how Cenk Uygur shuts down Ben Shapiro in this heated debate.
So can I ask you a question? I have two questions, really, serious questions. One, what is your ideal tax rate? Because it's going to cost a lot of money for a lot of this stuff. And two, what is your ideal level of medical care? Because the fact is that we can spend millions of dollars on people at end-of-life care. We can spend millions of dollars on surgeries and preventative care. I mean, healthcare is an expensive business, even under a single-payer system, which is why generally you end up with rationing. So what is your ideal level of healthcare that is provided to everyone, and what sort of tax rate are you proposing to subsidize that?
Yeah, so those are very, very fair questions. So let's talk about taxes for a second. So conservatives agree or say all the time that the golden era of America was the 1950s and 1960s. Well, there's a lot of truth to that. Our economy was booming at the time, and we became the #1 economy in the world at that time. The tax rate for the highest bracket fluctuated between 70 and 91%. So that is when we were at our best. Now, I want to be clear. I'm also a businessman, and boy, that seems high. It does, okay? And one of the reasons my family were Republicans when I was growing up was because before Reagan came in, the highest marginal tax rate was 70%. So now we are nowhere near that. We have reduced taxes to bare bones, and we have shifted the taxes onto the middle class and away from the rich and corporations. So there is a much better balance to be had. And if you said to me, well, you're going to have $800 in taxes that are new, I say, wow, that hurts. But you're going to save $1,000 in premiums, deal. That is a deal I will take every time because I can do math.
Okay.
So that is the beginning of your answer to taxes. And then you said how much care. Well, so that is something that all the countries that do single payer or a version of single payer struggle with, and they have learned a lot of lessons. And if we stop saying, America's #1, we might actually just, first of all, on this issue, we're number 37. So, and if we looked at what Japan is doing so well, keeping costs down to half of ours and less, we might actually learn something from Japan, Switzerland, and other countries. And by the way, when we say Medicare for all, Medicare Advantage exists. So you can actually add private insurance on top of that, and I find that perfectly great. I have no problems with that at all. So that is the government making sure you don't die and actually lowering rates for you. And then if you want more insurance, no problem.
So Ben Shapiro, as always, is pushing this idea that healthcare is just too expensive, that we'll all be taxed into oblivion, and that universal care inevitably means rationing. You know, the same tired fear-mongering that's been debunked 1,000 times, but Cenk Uygur just knocked the right out of the park. First of all, he pointed out the simple math that conservatives conveniently ignore. You might pay a bit more in taxes, but you're going to save even more on premiums, deductibles, co-pays, all the garbage fees private insurers tack on to milk us. Americans already pay more per capita on healthcare than anyone else in the world, yet we're ranked 37th globally in health outcomes. So what are we really defending here? Cenk Uygur also brought up such a strong point about history. He mentioned the 1950s and 60s, a time conservatives always idolize as the golden era. Well, during that era, the highest tax rates on the rich were between 70% and 91%. That was the same era when America built its infrastructure, expanded the middle class, and grew into a global superpower. So to act like we can't afford to take care of our people today is just dishonest.
So all this sounds great, except for the fact that Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security eat up 66% of the federal budget every single year. The idea that all of these socialized medicine countries have it so much better than we do, particularly in terms of cancer care, is a joke. We are still #1 in terms of 5-year cancer survival rate here in the United States. And when you talk about top marginal tax rates in the 1950s, there are a couple things that are worth noting. One, that was top individual marginal tax rates, not necessarily the business tax rate. We now have some of the highest corporate tax rates altogether in the industrialized world. And if you would prefer for us to destroy half of the world before we become the only country that didn't have its industrial capacity destroyed, which is what happened in the 1940s, leading to us being the only productive country on planet Earth, essentially, for the next 2 decades, I'm not with you there. I'm not really in favor of having a giant world war that destroys all industrial capacity across the West, so we're the only people who actually have the capacity to produce anything and just markets that we can provide to.
Right. So, first of all, it is fair to say that, of course, the 1950s and 60s were different. We'd just come out of the war. So, but you have to consider all the different factors. So one was that factor, and the other factor that was the one I mentioned. So when Republicans and conservatives say, well, high taxes by definition will lead to slower growth, well, we know because of our experience in the 1950s and 60s that isn't true. Now, you can say there are other factors, but you can't say that the highest marginal tax rate being 70 or even 90% slows down growth, because it didn't. And it wasn't in Japan and Switzerland, it was right here. And by the way, as a guy who grew up Republican, I was surprised by that too. I was surprised that Finland's system of non-competition in schools worked, but it does. So we have to be open to facts and understand. So, and on the issue of where we're good and not good in healthcare, sure, there are different areas where we excel. But Ben, honestly, you're cherry picking there one particular area that we're good. Overall, we're number 37. That is not a good result.
Well, you have
so
to break
if we're
down
not dying
what that
from cancer, we're dying from other things. It's empirical. We are not as healthy. And finally, this idea that corporations are paying the highest tax rate is both, again, true and untrue. The part that it's true is, hey, there's a rate of 35%. The part that's not true is they don't actually pay that. There is giant loopholes. And they've got $2 trillion sitting offshore, and they won't bring it in. And the reality is that if you look at the taxes from the 1950s, corporations used to pay about 1/3 of our taxes, about 33% of the taxes overall. So they did their fair share, and that is fair. I don't want them paying all of it, but I want them paying a reasonable amount. Now, the share that corporations pay of taxes is down to 10%. You see what they did there? They did wealth redistribution. They took your wealth and redistributed it to them.
Ben Shapiro keeps harping on about how Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security eat up 66% of the federal budget, as if that alone is some huge gotcha. But Cenk Uygur brilliantly points out, yeah, those programs take up a big chunk because they're actually popular and essential. People rely on them to stay alive and retire with dignity. And guess what? Americans overwhelmingly support expanding them, not cutting them. Ben Shapiro then tries to flex by saying the US has the highest 5-year cancer survival rate. That's true, but it's also cherry-picking one area where our system shines while ignoring that we still rank 37th in overall health outcomes worldwide. Our maternal mortality rate is shameful, the worst among wealthy nations, and we have higher rates of chronic diseases and preventable deaths. So sure, we might catch and treat certain cancers well if you can afford to get seen in time, but that doesn't make the system good overall. Cenk Uygur also hit Ben Shapiro hard on the taxes. It's so common for conservatives to bring up the 1950s tax rates and say, well, that was different. But the data is right there. Even with top marginal tax rates as high as 90%, America boomed. We built highways, sent people to the moon, and created the biggest middle class in history. You can't just brush that off.
Okay.
Ben, I'll let you respond to that.
Yeah, one more quick point, and then
Sure.
I'll be done with this because we can do healthcare for 8 hours here. But two things. One, I'd like to know which tax deduction. When people say tax loopholes, a tax loophole is just a tax deduction that's available to everyone, and some people take advantage of it and some people don't. I can't take advantage of certain corporate tax deductions because my business isn't in those businesses, for example. I'm sort of with you in the sense that I'm not in favor of tax deductions. I'm in favor of a lower tax rate and get rid of a lot of the tax deductions because I think that it's ridiculous that we have people gaming the system. That said, I'd like to know which tax deductions you'd like to do away with. And I'd like to know also, when you say that corporations pay 10% of the taxes, right, and individuals pay the other 90%, okay, so that means the taxes are still getting paid to a higher rate than we ever have in our history in terms of the tax revenue to the government. The amount of tax revenue to the government right now is trillions of dollars every year. And final point here, you elided this question by saying we can learn stuff from Japan. The standard of care is the entire question when it comes to single-payer health care. That is the entire thing. If people felt like they were going to get the same access to care in a single-payer healthcare system as they did in a system where they can pay their own way, then we would have no controversy here. But the fact is that rationing is mandated as soon as you start having the government run the healthcare system and decide what level of care people get. So I don't want anyone deciding what level of care that I can get. I don't want anyone else to. They don't care about me. They don't know my child's name. They don't know my name. All they know is how much I cost. I mean, Ezekiel Emanuel's at least honest about this. Ezekiel Emanuel comes out and says, listen, I want to die at 70, right? I want to die at 80. That's fine with me. I'd rather die at that. Well, that's good for him. But if I don't want to die at 80, or I don't want my father to die at 80, it's none of his damn business.
So when you say tax revenue is at its highest point, now you know that that's misleading because everything economically is at its highest point, meaning that we have a lot more people in the country than we did in the 1950s and 60s, so hence we are collecting more overall taxes. But the reality is, as a percentage, it is clearly down. The top bracket now is around 39%. It used to be at 91%. That's inarguable, right?
But our economy is significantly larger than it was then, and part of that is because of reductions in taxes over previous decades.
Well, we tried supply-side economics. Hey, Kansas, how's that working out for you? So there's this myth that...
It's working out for you. Your business is doing great.
Okay, yeah. Well, we just had 8 years of Obama. So the tax rate is clearly lower for the richest people in the country. It is clearly lower for corporations, in effect. It is, and so to say that it's a record collection is misleading. So in terms of the health care and how that relates to the government, oh, by the way, on one more thing on taxes, you said, name me a tax loophole. Mm-hmm. So yes, there are plenty of those. For example, they hide their money offshore. They do tricks like the double Dutch and the Irish sandwich or the reverse. And I would end that. I would say, hey, you know what? If we've got a 35% rate, here's the new rule. You're going to pay 35%, okay? And you're not allowed to hide your money. I don't care if it's in the Cayman Islands. We're going to make that illegal, Mitt Romney. We're going to make it illegal, okay? And so then every once in a while they do a tax holiday. Well, that must be nice. You remember when you got a tax holiday? I don't remember getting a tax holiday. No, that's only for corporations who bribe politicians. So they brought that rate down from 35% to 5%. And they said they were going to create more jobs. Color me surprised when it turns out they didn't. They offshore taxes. They took that 30% extra, put it in their pocket, gave it to their executives, and created no new jobs.
So first off, Ben Shapiro kept pushing this idea that if we move to single-payer healthcare, it means rationing and that the government will decide who gets to live or die. Total fear-mongering. The truth? We already have rationing in the US. It's just done by private insurance companies. Right now, your access to care depends on whether some corporate executives think it's profitable. In fact, a 2023 study found that nearly 1 in 4 Americans skipped or delayed medical care due to cost. That's rationing at its worst. Cenk Uygur rightly pointed out that if we moved to a system like Japan or many other developed countries, we'd actually spend less and get more. Japan spends about half of what we do per capita on healthcare, yet they have the highest life expectancy in the world. In the US, we spend more than double what most other rich countries spend, yet rank again 37th in overall healthcare outcomes. So this idea that more private spending equals better care is simply just false. And about taxes, Ben Shapiro tries to frame it as if corporations are these poor victims paying huge chunks of tax. But in reality, as Cenk Uygur mentioned, they pay way less than they used to. In the 1950s and 60s, corporations contributed about 33% of federal tax revenue. Now it's down to around 10%. Meanwhile, loopholes like the double Irish with a Dutch sandwich let big corporations shuffle profits offshore to avoid taxes altogether. In 2021, for example, Amazon paid an executive tax rate of just 6% on billions in profit.
Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.